Hey beautiful people of the internet, my name is Ryan and I have been thinking about making this video for a very long time. And then I sat down to make it and I realized I'd been thinking about it wrong for forever. So I wanted to make this video to lay down the ground rules for what makes a good title to a piece of literature. And I sat down to write it and I got most of the way through. I did a lot of thinking and I kind of pulled on my experience in the MFA program and my experience just as a reader, and I tried to do a little bit of reading on my own too, some research, and I decided that the entire concept was flawed. It turns out there are not necessarily some black and white rules about what makes a good title. Mostly what I learned in that major process of trying to research what a good title was is just that I have some favorite titles and those very well might not be your favorite titles. Very similarly to the way that short stories kind of resist rules and they resist simplicity just by the way that they exist. They kind of, by existing, make an argument for complexity in terms of what a short story can do. I think that titles do the very same thing. So here we are. I sat down to make a video about what makes a good title, and I ended up with, here are my 10 favorite titles and some ideas about why I maybe love those titles. Let's be honest, honest subjectivity is better than dishonest and supposed objectivity anyways. So here we go. 10 of my favorite titles in no particular order. The first piece of literature that always comes to mind when I talk about titles is the Flannery O'Connor story, Everything That Rises Must Converge. Yes, of course, Flannery O'Connor, the goddess of writing, appears in this video. Everything That Rises Must Converge has, since the very beginning, since before I'd even read the story, I heard that title and I thought, dang, that is one I'm gonna remember. I think, and this is probably gonna be a little bit of a theme in these videos because it's something that I think always hits me particularly in a spot real close to my heart. I think the thing about that title is that it's the kind of motion it conveys that I think makes a good outline, or it's kind of a good shape for what the story does. Everything that rises must converge. Like it all kind of narrows to a point. Like it comes to this moment of centering and of meaning as it centers. Yeah, and this is also probably going to be a theme, but I think the harder that I think about these things, the less sense they make to me. So if that doesn't sound like a good title to you, feel free to disagree with me in the comments below. But that's my take for one of my favorite titles ever, Everything That Rises Must Converge by Flannery O'Connor. Alright, numero 2 is Cat on a Hot Tin Roof by Tennessee Williams. So I very recently actually just saw a rendition of The Glass Menagerie by Tennessee Williams, which stole my heart. Like, oh my god, it was an experience. I left a complete wreck. Tennessee Williams is one of my favorite playwrights, and of course, as he should be, he's amazing. And Cat on a Hot Tin Roof has always been one of my favorite titles for, I think, this reason. That is a very simple title. Like, the longest word in that title is 4 letters long. And it's kind of this, like, anti-over-intellectual, if that's even a phrase, anti-over-intellectual title. It's not like Everything That Rises Must Converge has a little bit of a twinge of, like, okay, but I have to first understand what the word converge means to even understand this story. Whereas Cat on a Hot Tin Roof is just this weird, like, almost country metaphor for what's happening in the story, and I've always loved that. It's so accessible. It's fierce and it's full of life. That's my take, at least. So next is Big Two-Hearted River, actually, the story that we're going to be doing this Saturday for Short Story Saturday. Big Two-Hearted River by Ernest Hemingway, the short story, is also a story. Man, I wish I had, first off, I wish I had the beer here, the beer that gets its name from that story. I might have to buy some of that. The thing about that title that I love is that it conveys this kind of like contradictory, these two contradictory modes of description, right? So first off, big. Hemingway's obviously known for his like simple descriptors. Big River would be one kind of title for this story. Two-Hearted River would be a very different kind of title. Like, that is a like fiercely vulnerable kind of phrase, two-hearted. Like, that goes directly to the heart of the matter and directly to the metaphor, and it doesn't try for anything else. It goes directly to the metaphor. And I love that big is this very Hemingway kind of descriptor, whereas two-hearted is this also kind of Hemingway descriptor, but in a very different way. And those two work together and against each other, I think, particularly in that story, which actually we're going to be talking about on Saturday. So I won't say much more, but Big Two-Hearted River. Okay, number 4 is a book by a man who I have mentioned way too much recently on this channel, and I am still working on a video for. It's a book by Jesse Ball, and the name of the book is A Cure for Suicide. So I'm not going to say much about this book, except for the fact that that title immediately struck me, and the book, of course, backs it. That's not what this video is about. The book, of course, backs that up. It's an incredible book, but A Cure for Suicide, I think what that title does for me, it kind of, in the similar way to Big Two-Hearted River, it's got this contradiction into it, right? Like, there are a lot of other things that you could suggest for suicide, like a solution for suicide. There are other words there that I think would make a kind of sense in our world. A cure has this impossibility to it, like there is a cure for suicide, like you're asking an impossible question, and that also works pretty well for the book. And it also draws your interest, like you're, at least for me, which is the major disclaimer of this video, I'm keyed into that weird impossibility of that phrase, a cure for suicide. Okay, number 5, gotta give some love to one of my professors in grad school. She wrote one of the best short story collections titles that I can think of, which is 100 Apocalypses and Other Apocalypses by Lucy Corrin. So a close runner-up in this same category of title is the Ted Chiang book, Stories of Your Life and Others. I absolutely adore, like we're very used to that kind of short story collection title, where it's like, such and such story and other stories. But when you use that very form kind of like against itself, Lucy Corrin, for instance, calls some of her very short stories apocalypses. They're a lot of times like 1 to 6 lines long. She calls them apocalypses because of how quick they are and how quickly they turn. And then she writes other stories that are apocalyptic in nature, therefore the title that kind of plays on that. Whereas the Ted Chiang title, as I'm sure, I know a couple of you have mentioned Ted Chiang on this channel before. That collection, first off, absolutely brilliant, but that's my take. Titles that kind of play with the blank and other stories version of title. Luckily, the account representative knew CPR, a short story by David Foster Wallace. The thing about this title is that I think I would vehemently dislike it if it weren't for the account representative. That's what makes this entire story. Like if you were to call this story, that's what makes this entire title. If you were to title the story, Luckily the Bartender Knew CPR, I'm turned off by that. Like I know where that story's going. At least this is the feeling I get. I know where that story's going and I'm just not terribly interested. But it's something about the weird voice of Luckily blank knew CPR and the specific position of account representative. Like it enters into a certain kind of world which I wasn't expecting with this kind of story. And I think that's what kind of draws you in. Number 7, I think we're on number 7, A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. You guys have seen, I've made a video on A Little Life before, how incredibly good and how massively painful that book is. The thing about that title that I really love is that it takes a common phrase or a version of a common phrase and kind of twists it a little bit. Particularly the more you've read in that very, very long book, the more you know that the phrase "a little life," oh man, it twists and turns a million different ways too. It's one of those titles that I don't have any idea what exactly that title references. I could come up with about 6 different versions, I think, of what that title might mean to a reader. But I don't know what it means. And I think that's a kind of useful title. Number 8 is kind of related. It's the poetry collection Against Which by Ross Gay, most famously known for the Catalog of Unabashed Gratitude collection of poems. But Against Which is actually my favorite of his collection titles because it's kind of similar to A Little Life. It takes this phrase, which happens a lot of times in the middle of a sentence or in the middle of a much larger diagram of thought, and it uses it as an example of something. I think, man, this is going to sound really, really pretentious. I think what language does a lot of times, the way that subjects and objects and all of that work, is that it kind of language is used to show relationships between things, and Against Which is this very pared down kind of title that just suggests a relationship. It does the most simple thing that language can do, in my opinion. It suggests a relationship, and it's a kind of dramatic suggestion as well. So that's why I love Against Which. Okay, we are almost done. Number 9 is Everything is Illuminated by Jonathan Safran Foer. He is, of course, known for the other title, which I'm kind of blanking on right now, Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close, which is another title of this same kind of variety. But the reason I like Everything is Illuminated a little bit better is that is a very laughable phrase. Like, no novel, every novel aims to illuminate in some way, but no novel aims to illuminate everything. Like, it's a bald lie. But it's also like a self-aware lie. Like, Everything is Illuminated is quite the task for a novel to undertake. And so, of course, it's going to fail, but it's going to fail pretty spectacularly. And that's what draws me to that title, and it's what makes that novel pretty good as well. Okay, and number 10, this is a little bit out of left field, but it's the best example of this kind of title that I can think of. It's the book Atonement by Ian McEwan. I don't know how to say that name. Ian McEwan. The thing about Atonement is that title has never caught my eye. I read Atonement a very long time ago, and I reread it here in the last couple of years. And that title, like, for the first time I read that book, I kept forgetting what the title was. The good news is, the more you read into, it's one of those titles that it's like one word long, and it's specific enough of an idea that you know exactly what it is referencing, but it's not too broad where you're like, oh, that can mean almost anything. And it's not too obvious where it's like a little bit too narrow and a little bit too kind of esoteric. The thing about Atonement is that I read that book, and probably 10 times in the middle of that book I was like, oh my god, atonement. Yeah, and I think that's a kind of special kind of title as well. There's something to be said for that kind of accuracy, right? Where, like, there's probably a synonym for atonement that Ian McEwan could have chosen, but atonement was the right one. Okay, and I think that does it. Those are my 10 favorite titles. And by 10 favorite, I mean just 10 ones that I really like. Like, I don't actually keep a running list, so who knows if any of those would actually make the list. But they're 10 really good ones, and I think 10 examples of what I think that a title can do. I will say, for a little bit of an extra content, some bonus content here at the end, I was thinking earlier on my walk home what the worst titles I think I've ever heard are, and I know there's some really terrible titles out there, but I think the worst titles of really popular books that I know are actually something like Freedom by Jonathan Franzen, which I thought about, and I was like, yeah, that's so broad, and it's so, I kind of hate the title Freedom. But then I realized that it gets a lot worse, and that is Purity by Jonathan Franzen. The book's great. Freedom is even better. Freedom's an amazing book. Purity, also a pretty good book. But those are two really terrible titles. Okay, I am going to end the rant there before I upset too many people. I would love to know what titles you love, and also specifically, definitely how you disagree with me, because I think that there's no way a bunch of you don't disagree with me about what makes a good title, and I'm here to learn. So I would love to know what makes a good title in your head. What are some of the examples of the best titles that you've read? Let me know in the comments below. I've had this debate with a bunch of my reading friends for seriously about 6 years now, so this one's been bouncing around up there for a while, and I want to hear your take. What are some of the best titles? Alrighty, I am going to see you guys on Saturday when we talk about Big Two-Hearted River. Until then, happy reading, and I will see you guys soon. Best wishes!